The year was 2247, and our Earth had long ceased to be the solitary, blue planet it once was. It was now integrated into the Intergalactic Federation, a massive union of diverse worlds and life forms bound together through trade agreements, diplomatic relations, and a complex network of treaties. Among these various species were the Seraphim, a mysterious race of beings distinguished by their captivating, almost ethereal beauty, their highly developed psychic abilities, and a strict devotion to a rigid code of honor and well-defined social regulations. The Seraphim were often viewed as distant by other races, seeing themselves as custodians of order and profound wisdom. Their civilization thrived in a realm of radiant crystal cities and airborne gardens, where each aspect of life was carefully monitored and kept up by the Council of Ancients. For the Seraphim, disciplined behavior was of utmost importance, and any deviation from their established societal standards was met with quick and harsh consequences. Elara, a young woman of the Seraphim race, had always been different. Even from her early youth, she had questioned the decisions of the Council, pushing back against the unyielding structure that governed every part of her existence. She was particularly intrigued by the tales of other planets, specifically Earth, with its vibrant and diverse culture. Her curiosity eventually drove her to commit an act that would transform her life irrevocably. She utilized her psychic abilities to access restricted databanks and secretly immerse herself in human culture. To a Seraphim, this was a grave offense. The Council was intensely proud of maintaining their people's minds pure and untouched by the influence of those whom they considered to be lesser species. Elara's transgression was found out, and she was immediately summoned before the Council to explain her actions. The Council's hall was an immense, echoing chamber made of shimmering crystal, illuminated by an otherworldly glow that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The elders, imposing figures with flowing robes and eyes that shimmered with an internal light, sat in a semicircle surrounding Elara, their expression severe and unforgiving. Elara of the House of Volos, the leading elder, boomed, his voice vibrating through the chamber like distant thunder, "You are accused of breaking our most sacred laws. You have allowed your mind to be tainted by the thoughts and methods of a primitive species. Do you dispute these charges?" Elara stood straight, her lavender eyes meeting those of the elder without hesitation. "I do not deny it, elder," she said, "but neither do I regret it. How can we claim to be guardians of wisdom and knowledge if we refuse to try and comprehend the cultures of those we believe to be inferior? These humans are not what we assume them to be." A murmur of surprise passed through the assembled members of the Council. Never before had anyone dared to speak with such boldness in their presence. The leading elder narrowed his eyes and leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "You have defied our laws and brought disgrace upon your house. Your punishment must be severe, not only as retribution for your actions, but to serve as a deterrent to others who might follow in your misguided footsteps." Elara's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for her sentence. Exile? Perhaps imprisonment? She had prepared herself for these possibilities. But the words that followed were far beyond what she had ever expected. "You will be stripped of your status. Your psychic abilities will be suppressed. And you will be sent to Earth," the elder announced. "There, you will be handed over as a slave to a human, to serve as a living reminder of the consequences of disobedience. You will remain there until you have acquired the humility and obedience that you clearly lack." The word struck Elara like a physical blow. A slave to a human? In the eyes of any Seraphim, it was a fate far worse than death. Her spirit and pride recoiled at the thought, but the decision of the Council was final. She had no option but to accept her punishment. The journey to Earth was a blur of pain and humiliation. The Council's enforcers fitted her with a control device that dampened her psychic powers, rendering her powerless. She was then put into a stasis pod and taken to a remote human colony on the outskirts of the Federation, far from the thriving cities of Earth. Her new owner was a man named Thomas, an engineer who lived alone on a small farm outside the colony. When Elara's stasis pod landed in the dusty yard of Thomas's farm, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Thomas was a young man in his late 20s, with a slender build and a face weathered by years of hard work under the harsh sun. He had no notion of what to expect when the sleek Seraphim ship landed, but he definitely hadn't expected this. The pod opened with a soft hiss, revealing Elara standing within, her silver hair catching the fading sunlight like molten metal. She stepped out, her movements graceful despite the weight of the control device around her neck. Her lavender eyes scanned her environment, taking in the simplicity of the farm with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. Thomas looked at her, speechless. The authorities had informed him that he was to receive a gift from the Seraphim, but they had failed to explain what that gift would be. Now, confronted with this breathtakingly beautiful alien woman, he was at a loss for words. "I am Elara," she said, her voice cold and formal. "I have been sent here as your slave." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Thomas frowned, disliking the sound of it. He wasn't the kind of man who believed in owning another being, human or otherwise. The idea alone made his skin crawl. "Slave," he repeated, shaking his head. "That's not going to happen. I don't care what the Seraphim say, I'm not going to keep you as a slave." Elara looked at him, surprised by his reaction. "Would you then defy the will of your own government?" Thomas shrugged, scratching the back of his neck. "I didn't ask for this, and I sure as hell don't agree with it. As far as I'm concerned, you're free to leave whenever you want." Elara's eyes narrowed slightly. "And where would I go? The council has seen to it that I cannot leave this place, and even if I could, where would I go in a world that is not my own?" Thomas sighed, realizing that she was right. The Seraphim had ensured she was trapped there just as much as he was trapped in this secluded life. "Well, you're welcome to stay here as long as you like. I've got an extra room, and you can have the run of the place. I won't force you to do anything you don't want to." Elara didn't respond immediately. She had expected cruelty, indifference, or, at best, reluctant acceptance. But this human was offering her kindness, something she had not anticipated. It threw her off balance, and for the first time since her sentence was pronounced, she wasn't sure what to do. "Thank you," she said finally, the word sounding foreign on her lips. Gratitude was not something Seraphim often expressed, especially not to humans. Thomas nodded, giving her a small, crooked smile. "No problem. I'm Thomas, by the way. Guess we'll be getting to know each other, huh?" Elara simply nodded, not trusting herself to say more. She followed him into the small farmhouse, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. This was not what she had anticipated, and it certainly wasn't what she had wanted. But, for now, she had no choice but to accept her fate. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the farm in deep shadows, Elara found herself in a strange new world, bound to a man she knew nothing about. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: this was only the beginning of a story neither of them could have predicted. The days following Elara's arrival at Thomas's farm unfolded in a whirl of novel encounters and conflicting feelings. Earth was unlike anything she had ever experienced, untamed, raw, and bursting with life in a way that the Seraphim's meticulously controlled environment could never be. The air was thick with the scent of soil and vegetation, the sky, a vast, ever-changing canvas that extended beyond the horizon. It was all so different, so alien, yet strangely captivating. Despite the initial tension between them, Thomas and Elara started to settle into a tentative routine. Thomas would rise early each morning to tend to his crops and maintain the various machinery that kept the farm operational. Elara, still grappling with her new reality, would often watch him from a distance, observing his movements and attempting to understand this strange human who had shown her unexpected kindness. At first, Elara found herself at odds with the simplicity of life on Earth. The chores, the physical labor, the lack of advanced technology, all of it seemed primitive to her. On Seraphim, every task was performed with the aid of psychic powers or sophisticated machines, but here, everything was done by hand, and the work was hard. Thomas had given her the liberty to do as she pleased, but with no clear path back to Seraphim and little knowledge of human society, Elara found herself reluctantly helping out around the farm. Thomas, for his part, was patient with her. He didn't push her to do anything she was uncomfortable with, instead taking the time to explain how things functioned on Earth. He showed her how to repair the farm's irrigation system, how to tell when crops were ready for harvest, and even how to cook simple meals. Though initially resistant, Ilara couldn't help but be intrigued by the hands-on nature of it all. There was something satisfying about the tangible results of their efforts, a satisfaction she had never experienced in the sterile, controlled environment of Seraphim. Despite the growing camaraderie between them, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling of being trapped. The control device around her neck was a constant reminder of her imprisonment. Though it didn't physically restrain her, it dampened her psychic abilities, leaving her powerless to communicate with her people or manipulate the world around her as she once had. The thought of being bound to a human, no matter how kind he might be, was an affront to her pride and everything she had been taught. As the weeks passed, Ilara's frustration grew. She spent long hours wandering the outskirts of the farm, trying to find a way to disable the control device. The more she learned about human technology, the more she realized how primitive it was compared to Seraphim standards. The device was designed to be almost indestructible by anything Earth had to offer, or a failsafe to ensure that no Seraphim could easily break free from their punishment. But Ilara was nothing if not resourceful. She began to secretly study the device, using what little knowledge she had left of Seraphim technology. She knew that if she could find the right frequency, the device could be deactivated, at least temporarily. But without her full powers, finding that frequency was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Meanwhile, her interactions with Thomas became increasingly complex. At first, she had viewed him as nothing more than her captor, albeit a benign one. But as they spent more time together, she began to see him in a different light. Thomas was unlike any Seraphim she had ever known. He was patient, kind, and had a quiet strength that she hadn't expected. He didn't treat her like a slave or a subordinate, but as an equal, something she had never experienced on Seraphim. One evening, after a long day of work, Thomas and Ilara sat together on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the twin moons rise over the horizon. The air was cool and filled with the chirping of nocturnal insects. Thomas handed her a cup of herbal tea, a custom he had introduced her to, which she had surprisingly come to enjoy. "Do you miss it?" Thomas asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Your home, I mean." Ilara looked out at the moons, their pale light reflecting in her lavender eyes. "Every day," she admitted. "Seraphim, it's everything I've ever known. The beauty, the order, the power. It's hard to be away from it. But there were things I didn't realize I was missing until I came here." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I can't imagine what it's like for you, being forced to leave everything behind like that. But I'm glad you're here, Ilara. I know it's not what you wanted, but I've enjoyed getting to know you." Ilara glanced at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "You're different from what I expected," she said quietly. "Humans, we were taught to see you as inferior, driven by emotion and chaos. But you're not like that. You're kind." Thomas chuckled softly. "Not sure if that's a compliment or not, but I'll take it. I guess we're not all that different, really. We both have things we care about, things we're willing to fight for." Ilara nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what those things were for her anymore. Her desire for freedom was still strong, but the more time she spent with Thomas, the more she questioned what that freedom truly meant. Was it simply the ability to return to Seraphim, or was it something deeper? As the days turned into weeks, Ilara continued her efforts to disable the control device, but now with a sense of uncertainty. Part of her longed to return to Seraphim, to confront the council and reclaim her status, but another part of her was growing attached to the simple, honest life she was building with Thomas. The thought of leaving him behind filled her with a strange sense of loss, something she had never expected to feel for a human. One afternoon, while Thomas was out repairing one of the farm's solar panels, Ilara finally had a breakthrough. She had been experimenting with different frequencies, using an old radio transmitter she had found in the barn. After hours of trial and error, she finally found the right frequency. The control device gave a soft beep and powered down for a moment. Ilara stood in stunned silence, hardly able to believe what she had accomplished. She was free. The dampening effect was gone, and she could feel her psychic abilities returning, like a dam bursting after being held back for too long. She could reach out to Seraphim, contact her people, and finally find a way back home. But as she prepared to make the call, something stopped her, a feeling she couldn't quite place, a weight in her chest that made her hesitate. She looked out at the fields where Thomas was working in the distance, unaware of what she had just achieved. Ilara realized that leaving wasn't as simple as she had thought. She had come to care for Thomas more than she was willing to admit. He had shown her a different side of humanity, one that she hadn't expected and couldn't ignore. The idea of leaving him behind, of never seeing him again, filled her with a sense of dread she hadn't anticipated. She was faced with an impossible choice: to return to the life she had known, reclaim her place among the seraphim, or to stay on Earth with Thomas, in a world that was still foreign to her, but had become strangely comforting. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the farm, Ilara knew she had to make a decision. But, for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what the right choice was. The struggle for freedom, she realized, was not just about escaping her physical bonds, but about finding where she truly belonged. And that, she knew, was a journey she hadn't yet completed. The morning after Ilara deactivated the control device, she awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The power she had once taken for granted was now coursing through her veins, filling her with a strength and clarity she hadn't felt since leaving Seraphim. She could sense the vast network of Seraphim minds at the edge of her consciousness, waiting for her to reach out and reconnect. And yet, the decision she had to make weighed heavily on her. Thomas was in the kitchen when she entered, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the small farmhouse. He greeted her with a warm smile, his usual morning routine in full swing. Ilara watched him for a moment, a pang of guilt twisting in her chest. She had the power to leave now, to return to the life she had known, but doing so would mean abandoning Thomas, the man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, even when he had no obligation to. "Morning, Ilara," Thomas said, handing her a mug of tea, another habit she had picked up during her time on Earth. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," she replied, accepting the mug. She hesitated, then added, "Thomas, I need to talk to you about something important." Thomas set down his coffee and turned to face her, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What's on your mind?" Ilara took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I managed to disable the control device last night. My powers are back." Thomas's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, he didn't say anything. "You did? That's amazing, Ilara." There was a pause, a flicker of something in his expression that Ilara couldn't quite place. "So, what now?" "That's what I've been thinking about," she admitted, staring into her mug. "I can contact Seraphim now. I could ask for a ship to come and take me back, explain everything that happened, and try to clear my name." Thomas nodded slowly, his expression carefully neutral. But Ilara hesitated, the words catching in her throat. "But if I go back, it means leaving everything here behind. It means leaving you behind." Thomas looked at her, his eyes searching her face for a moment before he spoke. "Ilara, you don't owe me anything. If going back is what you need to do, then I won't try to stop you. You deserve to be free, to have your life back." Ilara could hear the sincerity in his voice, but also the underlying sadness. She had come to know Thomas well enough to recognize that he wasn't just saying what he thought she wanted to hear, he truly believed that she should make the choice that was best for her, even if it meant losing her. "That's the thing, Thomas," she said, her voice soft. "I'm not sure what I want anymore. I thought I knew, but now I'm not so sure." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then he sighed. "Look, Ilara, I don't know much about Seraphim or your world, but I do know that you've changed since you got here. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you found something here that you didn't expect. But whatever you decide, I'll support you." Ilara felt a rush of emotion at his words, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge until now. She reached out and took his hand, holding it tightly. "Thank you, Thomas. That means more to me than you know." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Finally, Ilara stood up, her resolve hardening. "I need to go back, at least for a little while. I need to confront the council and make them understand what I've learned here. But I want you to come with me. Thomas blinked in surprise. Me? To Seraphim? Yes, Elara said, her voice firm. They need to see that humans aren't what they think they are, that there's more to your kind than they've ever acknowledged. And I need you there with me to show them what I've seen. Thomas considered this for a moment, then nodded. All right. If that's what you want, then I'll go with you. But are you sure they'll let me? I mean, I'm just a human. I'll make sure they do, Elara said, determination burning in her eyes. It's time for things to change, and I won't let them dismiss you or your people anymore. With the decision made, Elara wasted no time. She reached out with her mind, sending a signal to the Seraphim network, announcing her presence and requesting an audience with the council. The response was immediate. A ship would be sent to retrieve her, along with her companion, as soon as possible. The council's tone was formal, almost cold, but they couldn't hide their surprise that Elara had managed to restore her powers and contact them. The days leading up to the ship's arrival were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and trepidation. Elara and Thomas prepared for the journey, packing what little they would need and making arrangements for the farm in their absence. Thomas taught Elara more about Earth, its history, and culture, so she could better explain it to the council. In return, Elara shared more about Seraphim and its rigid societal structure, hoping to prepare Thomas for the cold reception he might receive. Finally, the day arrived. The Seraphim ship descended from the sky in a blaze of light, its sleek crystalline structure hovering just above the ground. Elara felt a pang of nostalgia as she saw it, a reminder of the life she had left behind and the world she was about to re-enter. Thomas stood by her side, his face a mask of calm determination. Are you ready? He asked, glancing at her. As ready as I'll ever be, Elara replied, taking a deep breath. Together, they stepped forward, ascending the ship's ramp and into the cool, sterile interior. The journey to Seraphim was short, but it felt like an eternity. Elara's mind was racing, trying to anticipate how the council would react, what arguments she would make, and how she would convince them to see things differently. Thomas, too, seemed deep in thought, though he occasionally offered her a reassuring smile. When they finally arrived on Seraphim, Elara was struck by how alien it felt. The crystal towers and floating gardens that had once been her home now seemed distant and cold, lacking the warmth and life she had come to associate with Earth. The streets were filled with Seraphim going about their business, their expression serene and detached, completely unaware of the inner turmoil she was experiencing. The council chambers were exactly as she remembered them, vast, echoing halls of gleaming crystal, filled with an ethereal light. The elders were already assembled, their towering figures watching as Elara and Thomas entered the room. There was a palpable tension in the air, the kind that precedes a storm. Elara of the House of Volos, the head elder intoned, his voice resonating through the chamber, you have returned, as we knew you would. But you bring with you a human. Explain yourself. Elara stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Elders, I have returned not as a slave, but as a Seraphim who has learned the truth. You sent me to Earth as a punishment, to break my spirit and force me to submit. But instead, I found something unexpected, understanding, compassion, and a deeper connection than I ever thought possible. The elders murmured among themselves, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. The head elder raised a hand, silencing them. You speak of compassion and connection with a human, but what does this human have to do with us? Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady but respectful. I'm here because Elara asked me to be. I know you see humans as lesser beings, but we're more than what you think. We have our flaws, sure, but we also have our strengths, our capacity for empathy, for love, for growth. Elara saw that in me, and I've seen it in her. She's not the same person who left Seraphim. The elders exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by Thomas's words. The head elder narrowed his eyes, focusing on Elara. You claim to have changed, Elara of the House of Volos, but how can we trust the word of one who has defied our laws and consorted with a lesser species? Elara felt a surge of anger at the elder's words, but she forced herself to remain calm. I understand your doubts, Elder, but I ask you to listen to what I have to say. We have lived in isolation for too long, believing ourselves to be superior to all other species. But that isolation has blinded us to the truth that we are not as different as we think. By embracing our shared humanity, we can grow stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. There was a long, heavy silence in the chamber as the elders considered her words. Ilara could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the internal struggle between their ingrained beliefs and the possibility that she might be right. Finally, the head elder spoke. Your words are bold, Ilara of the House of Volos, but words alone are not enough to change the course of our society. We will consider what you have said and deliberate on the matter. Ilara bowed her head, accepting their decision. She knew that this was only the beginning, that true change would take time and effort. But she also knew that she had planted a seed of doubt in their minds, and that was enough for now. As they left the council chambers, Thomas turned to her, a faint smile on his lips. That went better than I expected. Ilara nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. It's not over yet, but it's a start. Thank you for being here, Thomas. I couldn't have done this without you. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. You're stronger than you think, Ilara. I'm just glad I could be here to help. Together, they walked through the crystal streets of Seraphim, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. Ilara knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be resistance and challenges to overcome. But she also knew that she wasn't alone in this fight, that she had Thomas by her side, and that together they could face whatever came their way. As they reached the edge of the city, where the crystalline structures gave way to open fields and endless skies, Ilara paused to look back at the place she had once called home. It felt different now, smaller, less imposing. And for the first time, she realized that home wasn't a place, but a feeling, a sense of belonging that she had found, not in the structures of Seraphim, but in the heart of a human who had shown her the true meaning of compassion. Are you ready to go back? Thomas asked, his voice gentle. Ilara smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Yes, she said, taking his hand. Let's go home. And with that, they turned away from the Crystal City, stepping into the future they would build together, a future where love and understanding could bridge the gaps between worlds. The journey back to Earth was bittersweet for Ilara. As the Seraphim ship cut through the starry expanse, she found herself reflecting on the events that had led her here. The meeting with the council had gone better than she could have hoped, but the uncertainty of what the future held weighed heavily on her mind. She knew that change, if it came, would be slow and fraught with resistance. Still, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. She had spoken her truth, and the council had listened more than she could have expected. Thomas sat beside her in the ship's quiet cabin, gazing out at the stars. The tension that had built up over the past few days seemed to have eased, and there was a calm between them now. Ilara turned to look at him, studying his profile in the dim light. She had grown so much in such a short time, and much of that was because of him. He had shown her a side of humanity she had never known, a side that was capable of deep compassion, understanding, and love. What are you thinking about? Thomas asked, turning to meet her gaze. Everything, Ilara replied with a soft smile. It's strange. When I was sent to Earth, I was so angry. I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me. But now, I'm not so sure. I've learned so much from you, Thomas, more than I ever thought possible. Thomas smiled back, his eyes warm. I'm glad, Ilara. You've taught me a lot, too. I never imagined I'd be standing before an alien council, trying to convince them that humans are worth something. But you believed in me, and that gave me the courage to speak up. Ilara reached out and took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. You're more than worth something, Thomas. You're everything to me. There was a moment of silence as the weight of her words hung in the air. Thomas's expression softened, and he gently squeezed her hand. You're everything to me, too, Ilara. I never thought I'd find someone like you, let alone fall in love with you. Ilara's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had been so focused on her mission, on her quest for freedom, that she hadn't allowed herself to fully acknowledge the feelings that had been growing inside her. But now, in this quiet moment, with the stars as their only witnesses, she couldn't deny it any longer. "I love you, Thomas," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I want to face it with you." Thomas smiled, a smile that lit up his entire face. "I love you too, Elara. We'll figure it out together." The ship continued its silent journey through the cosmos, carrying them back to Earth and the life they had started to build together. When they finally arrived, it was late at night, the stars shining brightly over the small farm that had become their home. The Seraphim ship landed softly in the field, its engines humming quietly as the ramp lowered. Elara and Thomas stepped out into the cool night air, their hands still intertwined. The farm looked the same as it had when they left, but to Elara, it felt different, more familiar, more welcoming. This was where she belonged now, not just because it was Earth, but because it was where Thomas was. As they walked towards the farmhouse, Elara felt a sense of peace settling over her. The journey she had started so long ago, with so much anger and resentment, had led her to a place she could never have imagined. She had found love, not just for Thomas, but for the life they had created together. They spent the next few days settling back into their routine, but there was a new ease between them, a sense of shared purpose. Elara used her powers sparingly, knowing that the council would be watching, but she no longer felt the need to hide who she was. Thomas encouraged her to explore her abilities, to find new ways to integrate them into their life on Earth. Together, they worked to improve the farm, using both human ingenuity and Seraphim technology to make it more efficient and sustainable. News of Elara's visit to the council slowly began to filter through the galaxy. Other Seraphim who had been exiled started to reach out, curious about her experience and eager to learn more. Elara found herself in a new role, not just as a former exile, but as a bridge between two worlds. She began corresponding with these Seraphim, sharing her knowledge and encouraging them to see the value in the connections they had made with other species. Thomas was always by her side, offering support and helping her navigate the complexities of her new life. They grew closer with each passing day, their bond deepening as they faced the challenges of building a life together on a planet that was still foreign to Elara in many ways. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Thomas turned to Elara, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Elara, there's something I've been thinking about," he began, his voice tentative. "What is it?" Elara asked, curious. Thomas took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden box. He opened it to reveal a simple yet elegant ring, its band crafted from a metal that gleamed in the fading light. "I know our lives are complicated, and there's still so much we don't know about the future. But I also know that I want to spend that future with you, no matter what. Elara, will you marry me?" Elara's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the ring, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never imagined that this moment would come, not in a million lifetimes. But now that it was here, she knew with absolute certainty what her answer would be. "Yes, Thomas," she whispered, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Yes, I will marry you." Thomas's face broke into a wide grin as he slipped the ring onto her finger. He pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her close as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into a gentle twilight. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, attended by the friends and neighbors they had come to know and care for. It was a simple ceremony held in the open field behind the farmhouse, with the stars shining brightly above them. Elara wore a dress made from the finest seraphim silk, its shimmering fabric catching the light in a way that made her seem almost otherworldly. Thomas wore a simple suit, his eyes never leaving Elara as they exchanged their vows. As they stood together, hand in hand, Elara couldn't help but think of how far they had come. The girl who had been sent to Earth as a punishment was gone, replaced by a woman who had found love, purpose, and a new sense of belonging. And the man who had once lived alone on a remote farm had found a partner who had shown him a world beyond his wildest dreams. When they finally kissed, sealing their vows under the watchful gaze of the stars, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, a chapter filled with hope, love, and the promise of a future they would build together. As the years passed, Ilara and Thomas continued to grow their farm, integrating more Seraphim technology and practices into their work. They became a symbol of unity and cooperation between their two worlds, a living testament to the power of love and understanding. Ilara's correspondence with other Seraphim grew into a network of like-minded individuals who sought to bridge the gaps between their people and the rest of the galaxy. Together, Ilara and Thomas faced the challenges that came their way, always with the knowledge that they were stronger together. Their love, forged in the crucible of adversity, became a beacon of hope for others, showing that even the most unlikely of unions could flourish with patience, respect, and understanding. In the end, Ilara found that her true home wasn't a place, but a person, a man who had shown her the beauty of a life lived with an open heart. And as they stood together, watching their children play in the fields they had nurtured with love and care, Ilara knew that she had finally found the freedom she had been searching for all along, the freedom to be herself, to love without fear, and to build a life filled with meaning and joy. And in that freedom, she found her forever.